So there is one sheet of paper at the middle of this, and the sheet has a stamp in the top corner, the sort of stamp a household office puts on laundry contracts and car bookings, and underneath that stamp there is an empty space where a signature belongs. Nobody signed it. That page went into the master file for the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey 48 hours before the doors opened, and it gave one order. The page told the protocol team to rebuild the seating plan. It took Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, the woman who does more public work in a year than anybody in that family, except the king himself, out of the front row beside her brother, and it put her in the second row behind people whose entire annual workload she gets through in a fortnight. According to a documented account of the review that came afterwards, that instruction came out of Queen Camilla's private office, and it travelled with the king's name attached to it, and none of the king's authority behind it. Camilla holds no state duty today. None. The diary went to Anne. Every diplomatic file, every state visit, every Commonwealth engagement, the whole portfolio moved across in a single afternoon, and the woman Camilla wanted in the second row is the woman who signs for it now. There is a clause in the document Camilla put her name to at the end of all this, and the clause carries a number: 30 days. People close to the handover say that number is the part she read twice, then read again. The morning those 30 days run out is the morning her own family finds out what a seating card cost them. There's a page in front of me with a stamp in the corner and no name written under it, and I have been looking at the empty space under that stamp for about a week. I'm Harold. I go through the filings, the household paperwork, and the reporting that piles up around this family, and I tell you what I think is sitting underneath it. Stay with me to the end, because by then you will know the exact morning that clause runs out and what comes off the accreditation list before lunch that day. Now walk back to the beginning, because the beginning is boring, and that is the point. Every large royal event gets archived afterwards. Operational logs, courier registries, the physical diagrams the ushers held, the digital approvals, all of it goes into a review and somebody signs off that the event matched the plan. It is filing. 99 times out of 100, a clerk ticks the boxes and the file closes and nobody ever opens it again. Quick note before we continue, everything I dig up that doesn't make it into these videos I put into a free weekly letter. Join more than 10,000 royal insiders at crownletter.com. The link is in the pinned comment below. If you're watching on your TV, just point your phone at the QR code on screen. This time, Prince Edward held the pen. He was working as a procedural inspector for the Royal Household Cabinet Office, which is the kind of job people assume is decorative until somebody does it properly. Edward, for what it is worth, is a man the press stopped bothering with years ago. The King made him Duke of Edinburgh on the 10th of March 2023, on his 59th birthday, and the coverage lasted about a day and a half. He carries his father's title and almost none of his father's attention, and going through operational logs line by line is the sort of work that suits a man nobody is watching. He found the mismatch inside an hour. The physical seating diagram that the ushers worked from inside the Abbey on the day did not match the master blueprint that the Privy Council had approved 3 months earlier. The Privy Council is the body that formally signs off the ceremonial order of the state, and its approvals are not suggestions. They are the record that makes an event official. If the room does not match the blueprint, the record is wrong, and a wrong record on a state occasion is not a rounding error. The difference was not subtle either. The approved plan put Anne in the front row, directly flanking the King and Queen. That placement is not decoration. Buckingham Palace's own year-end figures had the King on 532 engagements across 2025 and the Princess Royal on 478, and she was doing that at 75 years old, 18 months after the incident with a horse at Gatcombe Park in June 2024 that put her in hospital for 5 nights with concussion and a head injury. She was back at work inside a month. That is the woman the front row belongs to, and everybody who has ever built a royal seating chart knows it. On the day, her card sat in the second row. Edward went to the Core Constitutional Registry next, which is where any change to national priority seating has to be entered. He was looking for one of 3 things: a royal warrant, an official decree. anything at all bearing the king's own hand. Under the rules that govern this, a change to the priority order requires the sovereign's explicit written approval, and it has to be registered in the constitutional order book in ink with a date. The registry had nothing. No warrant, no decree, no entry, no date. The seating of the Princess Royal at a Commonwealth State Service had been altered, and the book that exists to record exactly that kind of alteration was blank. Hold that in your head, because the blank page in the registry matters more than the memo does, and I will come back to why on the other side of what he found next. Edward pulled the master file apart, and there it was, slotted in among the approvals, dated 48 hours before the service. An intervention memorandum. The wording claimed the king's authority. The instruction told the protocol team to overhaul the layout immediately. That afternoon, no queries. And because the paper carried an administrative seal in the corner, the protocol staff did what staff do at 48 hours out with 300 guests confirmed and a broadcast schedule locked. They stopped asking, and they moved the cards. Edward spotted the flaw in about the time it takes to read the first paragraph. King Charles does not issue last-minute changes to constitutional precedents. He cannot, on his own, over a Tuesday afternoon. A change of that kind goes through a formal conference with the Home Secretary and the great officers of state. It gets minuted, and it lands in the order book with the sovereign's sign manual on it. Sign manual is the phrase for the king's own signature applied to a state instrument, and it exists so that nobody can ever claim afterwards that the crown wanted something the crown never wanted. That signature is the difference between an order and a piece of paper. There was no sign manual anywhere near this thing. Somebody had put the king's name on an instruction the king had never given, and 300 people in Westminster Abbey had then sat down in an arrangement the king had never approved, on camera, in front of the Commonwealth. That is the moment the filing job stopped being a filing job. Edward ordered every cabinet office record impounded that same day. He had the digital backups pulled from the Royal Document Management servers before anybody in any department knew a review was live, which was smart because the first thing that happens when people learn an audit has started is that files begin to tidy themselves. Preliminary forensic checks came back clean and simple. The memorandum had never come off the king's private desk. The seal in the corner was a standard household administrative stamp, the one that goes on routine internal traffic, and the sacred seal reserved for instruments of the crown had never touched it. Somebody had used a stationery stamp to overrule the Privy Council. Honestly, that is the detail I keep coming back to, not the ambition of it, the arrogance of the assumption underneath it. Whoever pushed that page into the file was banking on the idea that nobody in the entire royal household would ever cross-check a seating diagram against an approval that was 3 months old. They were nearly right. In an ordinary year, they would have been completely right. The only reason any of this surfaced is that the man doing the review was the one member of that family who has spent 40 years being underestimated and has developed a habit of reading things all the way through. Edward marked the file under the highest threat index available to him and started following the paper backwards. Now here is where the shape of the thing changes, because a document does not walk into a building on its own. Every piece of paper that moves between royal departments moves through chain of custody, handwritten courier registries at each door, digital tracking references on every transfer. Somebody signs when it leaves, and somebody signs when it lands. And those signatures sit in a ledger that nobody thinks about until a man like Edward asks for it. He pulled the tracking reference on the memorandum and followed it, door by door, and the route it took was not the route paper takes when it has nothing to hide. It skipped desks. It went around the 2 offices whose entire function is to check exactly this kind of instruction. Somebody had walked that page through the building along a path chosen to avoid the people who would have stopped it. It reached the protocol division on the morning of the second day, and the protocol division, to its enormous credit, did not swallow it. The senior legal advisors read the memorandum and knew within minutes that the thing had no legs. They did what people in that position are supposed to do. They drafted 2 formal legal warning notices, on the record, in the file, with times on them. The first notice said that altering the seating priority of the Princess Royal cut across the royal prerogative and the established statutory provisions that sit under the Commonwealth arrangements, and that the household had no authority to touch it. The second notice went further and colder. It warned that carrying out a structural change of this kind without the King's direct sign manual would compromise the legal legitimacy of the entire state ceremony. Not the seating, the ceremony. The whole event in the Abbey broadcast to 56 countries. 2 lawyers in writing told the household to stop. Both notices left their desks. Neither notice arrived. Somebody intercepted them and wiped them out of the official workflow, and the King never saw a word of either one. Neither did Prince William. 2 formal legal objections to a state matter went into the system and came out the other side as nothing at all. That is the part where this stopped being about a chair. I want to be careful here because none of the private conversations in this story have been confirmed by anybody with a name, and the household does not comment on internal reviews. The paperwork that came out of it is a different matter, and the paperwork is where I am spending my time. Edward went at the delivery receipts. Courier ledgers are dull, and they are also unforgiving, because every hand that touches a document leaves a signature and a time next to it. He worked the trail forward from the 2 suppressed notices instead of backward from the memo, and the 2 lines crossed at one desk. The man at that desk was Colin, a career civil servant, decades in, head of administrative coordination inside the office of the Queen. Not a famous man, not a man you have heard of. The person who decides which paper reaches which principal, and in what order, which in a building like that one is a great deal more power than the job title suggests. Colin's signature was on the receipt for both legal warning notices. His initials were on the instruction that told the protocol team to enforce the memoranda, regardless of the objections. Edward called him in for a formal audit interview. That phrase sounds gentle. It is not. A formal audit interview inside the royal household is a room with 2 people, a table, and every document already laid out in the order that hurts most. Colin walked in and found the 2 suppressed notices sitting face up. Next to them, the courier receipts with his own handwriting on them. Next to those, the memorandum with the stationery stamp in the corner. He had nothing. There was nothing to have. Colin signed a formal deposition that afternoon. The statement said the memorandum had come directly from Queen Camilla's private office, on her explicit personal instruction, and that he had carried it through the building himself. Sit with that for a second, because a career civil servant does not put his name to a sentence like that unless the alternative in front of him is worse. The reasoning he gave is the part that stays with me. According to the deposition, Camilla had been watching the Commonwealth Day arrangements for weeks, and what she kept returning to was the front row. Anne on one side of the King, herself on the other. Cameras from 56 countries in the nave. The first big international showcase of the new reign. The pictures that would run everywhere and get reprinted for the next 30 years, and in every single frame, the Princess Royal. She wanted the Princess Royal further back. That is the whole of it. And I understand why people hear that and think it sounds small. It is small. It is also, if you have spent any time watching how this family operates, completely coherent. Camilla has spent 3 decades in a position no amount of good work has ever fully fixed. One of Diana's former staff put it to a reporter years ago in a line I have never been able to shake, that Camilla is competing with a woman who cannot get any older, cannot make a mistake, and cannot be photographed badly ever again. Diana died on the 31st of August 1997, and the country buried her on the 6th of September. And in the memory of the audience, she is 36, and she stays 36. The Queen looks at the front row of Westminster Abbey and she does not see a chair. She sees a photograph that will be used as evidence for years by people who never wanted her there. That fear is real. The response to it is where the whole thing comes apart, because the woman she chose to move is the single hardest target in Britain. Anne does not compete. She is never given an interview asking to be liked. She turned down titles for her own children, which is a decision people still cannot get their heads around. So Peter and Zara went through life as Mr. Phillips and Miss Phillips. She does 478 engagements a year, drives herself, wears the same coat for 20 years, and has an unbroken record of saying nothing whatsoever about anybody in her family in public. There is no attack surface. You cannot damage her reputation because she has never asked the public for anything to hold against her. Moving Anne to the second row does not make Camilla look more central. It makes the household look like it has a problem, and it makes anybody who notices go straight to the question of who wanted it and why. Somebody in the comments on the last video wrote that the royal family never gets punished, that it all gets smoothed over and forgotten, and I have thought about that a lot while going through this. I think it depends entirely on who inside the building finds out first. Edward compiled everything into a single master audit dossier. The memorandum, the 2 suppressed legal notices with their original timestamps, the chain of custody logs with the skipped desks marked, the forensic report on the stationery seal, Colin's signed deposition on top. Then he took it to Prince William. Now, think about the position that puts William in because it is genuinely unusual. He is not the king. He has no authority to discipline the Queen. He is the heir, which in constitutional terms means he is the man who inherits every consequence of every decision his father makes and gets no vote on any of them. Everything in that dossier lands on him eventually, in 20 years or in 5, whenever it lands. According to people who have described his response, William read the file twice and then asked one question, which was whether the ushers on the day had been given a written instruction or a verbal one. That is the question of a man who has already worked out where the exposure is. His view of it reportedly had almost nothing to do with the seating. He treated the whole thing as a structural breach. And the logic runs like this. If a member of the royal family can take a household stamp, attach the king's name to a page, and override an approval issued by the Privy Council, then the seal on the page means nothing. And if the seal means nothing, then every instrument that carries it becomes arguable. Royal assent to legislation, letters patent, treaty ratifications, every future decree of the reign, and every past one. None of that stays inside the palace if it leaks. A member of Parliament asks one question about the manipulation of Privy Council documents, and the household has to answer it in public, on the record, and the answer is that the Queen's office pushed a state change through on a laundry stamp. The people who have spent 30 years arguing that the monarchy is an unaccountable arrangement of private favours would not need to say a single word. They would read the file out loud. William's conclusion, according to those close to it, was that a private apology could not touch this. An apology fixes a personal wrong. Nothing about this was personal by the time it reached the Abbey floor. There is a detail in the middle of all this that I keep turning over. Princess Charlotte was in the room for part of the closed door assessment. She is 11 years old. She had spent the 1st of August at the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow with her brothers, in the stands, on camera, 3 children being photographed doing something children enjoy. A few weeks later, her father sat her down while adults went through a legal dossier about a woman who had used her grandfather's name without asking. I have gone back and forth on that. Part of me thinks 11 is far too young for a room like that. The other part knows exactly what William is doing, and it has a date attached to it. He was 15 when he walked behind his mother's coffin through central London on the 6th of September 1997, in a dark suit, in front of 1 million people and 2.5 billion more on television, and nobody in that building had prepared him for a single second of it. He has said since that he did it because he was told the family expected it. He is not doing that to his daughter. She is going to know how the machine works long before the machine ever asks anything of her. Whether that is kindness or a different kind of weight, I honestly could not tell you. William's reading of Camilla's motives, by the accounts that have come out of it, was cold to the point of being clinical. He accepted that her insecurity was genuine. He accepted that she has never commanded the public affection Anne gets for free, or the affection his mother still gets from people who never met her. He recognized the fear as real, and he did not care, because turning a private fear into an instruction that carries the king's name is not a mistake of character. It is a use of the crown's authority for a personal purpose, and once it is on paper, it stops being a feeling and becomes an act. He instructed Edward to coordinate with the independent royal council's office and draft the most severe instrument the household's own rules would support. They came back with something called a decree of voluntary transfer under royal prerogative. The name is soft. The contents are not. It permanently revokes all diplomatic authority, all state scheduling rights, and all administrative oversight from the office of the Queen, and it moves every one of those functions to the Princess Royal, permanently, with no route back. The word voluntary in the title is doing a specific job, and I want you to notice it now because it becomes the cruelest part of this later on. With the draft finished, William asked his father for a private audience. No courtiers, no private secretaries, no aides taking notes at the side of the room. 2 people. He put the audit dossier on the desk and the draft decree beside it. And then he did the thing that must have been hardest, which was to present it flat. No adjectives. The memorandum, the stamp, the missing sign manual, the 2 lawyers who wrote warnings that went nowhere, the courier ledger, the deposition. In order, without once saying the word betrayal. Charles read it in silence. Every account of that meeting agrees on the silence. He has spent decades defending this marriage. He spent the 90s losing the argument in public. He married her at Windsor Guildhall in April 2005, with the church holding the ceremony at arm's length. He moved her through Duchess of Cornwall to Queen Consort, to Queen in increments so careful they took 18 years. And at every stage, the person he was protecting her from was the public. It had not seriously occurred to him, according to those close to him, that the risk might one day travel in the other direction. The exposure was not arguable. If Parliament demanded an inquiry into the handling of Privy Council documents, the Crown had no defence to offer, because the defence would have to be that the household's approval process can be bypassed by anybody with access to a stamp. William's warning to his father was blunt, and by any reading, brutal. Enforcing the decree would break the marriage. There was no version where it did not. The monarchy could not be traded for his father's personal comfort. And if the king hesitated, William said he would take constitutional measures in public to protect the throne he is going to inherit. A son said that to his father across a desk. Whatever else you think about this story, hold on to that sentence because it tells you which of the 2 men in that room was thinking about the year 2060. Charles signed. The confrontation happened at Sandringham, in a small oak-panelled conference room on the ground floor that the household uses for estate business. The household kept the room to 3 people, with no private secretaries taking notes at the side, and no protection officers inside the door. Camilla walked in expecting a family briefing. Accounts of that afternoon say she had been told it concerned the autumn programme, and she came in the way anybody comes into a meeting about diary planning, which is to say already thinking about something else. The dossier was face down on the table. William turned the documents over and moved them across to her one at a time. The memorandum first, with the stationery stamp in the corner and the blank space where a signature should be. Then the first legal warning notice. Then the second. Then the courier ledger with the skipped desks circled. Then last, Colin's deposition, which names her in the 3rd line. Her composure went somewhere in the middle of that sequence. There was nothing available to say. A denial needed the deposition to be a lie, and the man who signed it had spent his whole working life in her office and had no reason on earth to invent it. She looked at Charles. He turned his face away. I have read a lot of descriptions of a lot of royal rooms, and that gesture is the one that landed hardest, because it is the only moment in this entire story where somebody does something instead of signing something. 30 years of a man defending a woman against a country, and it ends with him looking at the wall of an estate office in Norfolk. He spoke quietly, The accounts that describe it agree on the substance, if not the exact words. He said her actions had broken the trust her position requires. He said affection belongs to private life, and that the authority of the crown is never available to anybody for personal pride, not to her, not to him, not to anybody who comes after. Then he took the cap off his fountain pen and signed the emergency decree in front of her, at the table, while she watched. There was one more piece of paper after that. A formal admission of misconduct, drafted for her own signature. The choice she was given had 2 doors and no third one. Sign it, and the whole matter stays inside the household as an administrative transfer. Refuse, and the household refers the file to a public disciplinary process which puts the memorandum, the suppressed legal notices, and Colin's deposition into a proceeding that reporters can attend. She signed. People in a position to know say her hand shook badly enough that she had to steady it against the table. And that is where the word voluntary in the title of the decree does its work. Her signature is on it. For the rest of her life, every account of this will be able to say with complete accuracy that Queen Camilla transferred her responsibilities voluntarily. From that signature onward, the Princess Royal holds the portfolio, the state representation, the diplomatic authority, the scheduling of the Queen's former engagements, the administrative oversight of that entire office. All of it sits with Anne. I did not expect the next part at all, and it is the reason this story is worth 40 minutes of your time rather than 4. Anne did not enjoy it. Not one part of the handover reads like a victory. She asked for a private meeting with Camilla to execute the transfer, and by every description the tone in that room was formal and businesslike and almost unbearably ordinary. They went through the upcoming diplomatic engagements one by one. They took an inventory of the international patronages, which charity sits with which office, which anniversary falls in which month, who has been promised a visit and when. Camilla handed over the security keys. She handed over the classified files. Anne took notes by hand throughout, which she has always done, on paper, in a bound notebook, the way her mother did, and the way Diana did with her own correspondence, sitting at a desk answering letters herself because she did not trust the process to sound like her. And at the end of it, Anne did something nobody in the household had asked her to do. She proposed a review clause, 3 months, with a compliance check at the front of it. She wanted a defined period, written into the instrument, at the end of which the household would assess whether Camilla had kept the terms, before anybody made permanent decisions about the charitable work she has left. That clause is the single most interesting document in this entire story, and I have been holding it since the first minute of this video, so let me put it in front of you properly. The compliance check is set at 30 days from the signature. 30 days, not 90, because the drafters wanted the first test to happen while everybody could still remember exactly what they had agreed to. Count them out from the Sandringham table, and the 30th day lands on a Monday, which is the same weekday as the Commonwealth Day service that started all of this, and I do not think for 1 second that the person who chose the number failed to notice that. The clause itself runs to a couple of lines of household drafting. It says that on the 30th day, the Office of the Princess Royal reviews all outstanding accreditations, listings, and standing invitations issued under the authority of the former Office of the Queen, and that any entry which cannot be matched to a current warrant comes off the list. Read that twice, because it does not say Camilla. Every name that got onto a list through the Queen's office is inside that sentence. The decree already bars Camilla herself from invoking the King's name or royal authority for any purpose. The compliance check is what happens when somebody applies that same test backwards to every standing arrangement her office ever made and asks a single question about each one. Does a warrant exist behind it? Her family have never had titles to sit behind. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes have no royal rank and never have, which is a decision Charles and Camilla made deliberately years ago and were praised for at the time. Their access to that world has always run through one office, and on the 30th day, that office does not exist anymore. Nobody gets thrown out of anything. Nobody's name gets struck through in red ink. It is quieter and far worse than that. A clerk rebuilds the lists from the warrants, and anything that came from a phone call, a note, a private word, or a card written on the Queen's own paper does not go back on. Before 11 in the morning on a Monday, in an office nobody has heard of, a clerk goes through a database and does not copy some names across. That is the harsh part. There is no argument to have and nobody to have it with. I will come back to what happened on that Monday because a specific thing happened and it involves a photograph. First, we have to talk about the appearance that made this whole transfer look, to the outside world, like nothing at all. Days after the signature, the Princess Royal made her first major international appearance as a central representative of the Crown. A keynote address at a state reception, full diplomatic guest list, cameras along the back wall, the exact kind of evening that had been in the Queen's diary for the better part of a year. Anne delivered the speech that Camilla's team had written, word for word. Not a rewrite, not a version of it with the good lines kept. The text that had been drafted inside the office she had taken over, read from the podium without a single alteration, including the 2 jokes in the middle that were built for somebody else's delivery. Anne made that choice on purpose, and it is the smartest single move anybody makes in this entire story. Every reporter in that room had one question they were waiting to have answered, which was whether something had gone wrong inside the palace. A new speech would have answered yes. The old speech answered no. It said the office had not changed direction. The policy had not changed. The work was continuous, and the woman at the podium was standing in rather than taking over. The press had nothing to hold. The following morning's coverage ran on the content of the address and the guest list, with a line at the bottom about the Princess Royal deputizing for the Queen, and the story died there, in a caption, at the foot of a column. A transfer of every state function held by the Queen of the United Kingdom passed through the British media as a diary note. Camilla watched it from her private sitting room at Clarence House on her own. She had a live broadcast of an evening she had planned, running to a schedule her office had built, with her own words being read out by the woman she had tried to move into the second row, and no way to react to any of it, publicly or privately, because the terms she had signed forbid her from making any statement about the arrangement at all. That is the humiliation, and it outlasts the meeting in Norfolk by a lifetime. Sandringham took 40 minutes. This version repeats, on a screen, in an empty room, and there is another one of these evenings in the diary every few weeks for the rest of her life. The terms she signed are worth going through slowly because people here stripped of duties and picture an argument. This is not an argument, it is offence, and every plank in it is specific. She is barred from state duties, barred from official overseas tours, barred from major Commonwealth events, which removes her from the single most photographed category of royal work there is. Her access to diplomatic briefings ends, and her access to the classified state archives ends with it, so she does not receive the papers and she does not know what is in them. Her public presence is confined to a short list of personal charities with no official standing, and across all of it sits the clause that does the real damage, the prohibition on invoking the king's name or royal authority for any purpose whatsoever. She may attend, she may not represent. And for most of the year, she does it from Wiltshire. The decree requires her to vacate the central palaces and take up residence at Raymill House, the house she bought in 1995 and never sold, the one she kept through the marriage, through the accession, through the coronation, the private property that was always there in case any of it went wrong. 30 days to be out. The same 30 days. That detail sits in the household paperwork as a logistics line, and it is not a logistics line. Somebody looked at the calendar and put the removal vans and the accreditation review on the same morning. The Monday she leaves Clarence House is the Monday a clerk rebuilds the lists. She has her granddaughter for company. Lola is 19 now, and by the accounts of people around the family, she is the one member of the younger generation who has kept going down to Wiltshire since the transfer, without an arrangement, without an office booking it, driving herself the way anybody visits a grandmother. It is worth saying plainly that none of this is her doing, and none of it is her family's doing. The marriage survives on paper. The king and queen remain married, they appear together where the constitution requires it, and the whole thing runs at a temperature you could store meat in. Charles put himself into the work. He always does. According to those close to him, he is formal with her in private now, which is the cruelest possible way for that particular marriage to end, because formality is the exact thing they spent 30 years fighting the entire country to be allowed to drop. He defended her against the press, against the church, against his own mother's household, and against a public that spent a decade treating her as the reason a young woman's life fell apart. He won that. It took him until 2005 to marry her, and until 2023 to have her crowned, and he won it. And the thing that finally broke it was not any of them. She did it herself, on a page, with a stamp that belonged to somebody else. William came out of this as the person who will be running the institution long before he is king, and everybody inside the building now knows it. He proved he will enforce discipline on a family member with nothing to gain and his father's marriage to lose. That is the whole job, and he did it at an age when most people are still deferring to the room. Charlotte watched a piece of it, 11 years old, in a chair at the side, while adults went through a legal file. People who worked for Diana say the girl has her grandmother's way of dropping her chin and looking up when she is working something out, which is the sort of thing that gets written in a caption under a photograph, and usually means nothing. In that room, it meant she was paying attention. Anne carries the state work now on top of the 478 engagements she was already doing, and she has said nothing about any of it. She will not. In 50 years, she has never once briefed a journalist about a member of her family, and she is not going to start at 75. Now, the Monday. The removal vehicles came to the private entrance at Clarence House early, before the road filled up. Somebody with a long lens got 2 frames of a woman in a raincoat standing beside a car in a courtyard, and one of them ran the next day, small, inside, with a caption about the Queen relocating to Wiltshire for the autumn. No headline, no story attached. A picture of a woman standing next to a car, in the position on the page that newspapers reserve for things that do not matter. Inside a household office that same morning, before 11, a clerk opened the accreditation database and started the review the clause required. Every listing, every standing invitation, every accreditation issued under the authority of an office that had ceased to exist 29 days earlier, checked against the warrants. The entries with a warrant behind them stayed. The rest did not come across. No letters went out because nothing had been withdrawn. There is no document anywhere that says a single member of the Parker Bowles family was removed from anything, and there never will be, because that is not what happened. The lists were rebuilt from the record, and the record only ever held one authority for those entries, and that authority signed itself out of existence at a table in Norfolk. The first Christmas list of the new arrangement runs to the warrants. So does the first state banquet of the following year, and the diplomatic reception after it, and the garden parties, and the enclosure passes, and every arrangement that used to begin with a phone call from an office on the first floor. A family that had access for 20 years now has an ordinary relationship with the British state, which is to say, none at all. 30 days. That was the number I held at the start, and now you have seen where it sits and what it does. 1 clause, 2 lines of household drafting, 1 Monday morning, no announcement. The thing I keep coming back to is how little was needed to prevent all of it. Anne was not a threat to her. Anne has never made a claim on the front row, never asked to be photographed, never once competed for anything, and if Camilla had sat down next to her in the Abbey and said nothing at all, the pictures from that morning would have shown 2 senior women of the same family doing their jobs, and the entire country would have looked straight past it. She built the crisis out of nothing. She looked at a chair and saw a verdict. Diana comes into this at the end whether anybody wants her to or not, and not in the way people expect. William did not do this for his mother, and there is no evidence anywhere that he thought about her while he was reading the dossier. He did it because he could count the years forward, and he could see what an unenforced stamp does to an institution in 50 of them. But the fear underneath the whole affair, the thing that made a grown woman with a crown and a household and a diary full of state visits decide that a seating card mattered enough to risk everything, that came from a woman who has been dead for 29 years, whose photograph is in a frame in a room in Kensington, and who never had to ask anybody for the front row. Camilla still works. That part is real, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. She keeps a short list of her own charities. She turns up. She does the reading. She takes the flowers. And on the last Friday of every month, according to people who see the correspondence, a note goes from Raymill House to the office of the Princess Royal in her own hand, on unheaded paper because the headed paper is not hers to use anymore, offering to attend whichever engagement in the coming diary the office thinks would benefit from her being there. The office files them under correspondence. There has not been a reply yet. That is where the record stands as I read it. I'm Harold. Stay close, because the next thing I want to put in front of you is the household's own year-end return, the one that lists every engagement by whose office arranged it, and there is a column on that document with her name at the top and nothing under it. If you'd like more of this, I write a free letter every week. Join more than 10,000 royal insiders at crownletter.com. The link's in the pinned comment. If you're watching on your TV, just point your phone at the QR code on screen and I'll see you there.